Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Plattwoods Church. If you're here in person or watching our recording online, we want to welcome you here. My name is Brandy Molina, and I am the Director of Mission and Outreach here at Plattwoods Church. I want to welcome you to tonight's courageous conversation on a topic that is deeply important and timely. Tonight, we will be discussing immigration, migration, refugees, and the role of the church. As we gather here, we're reminded of our shared responsibility as a faith community to offer support, advocacy, and compassion to those in need. Our discussion today aims to explore how we as a church can better understand the complexities of immigration, migration, and refugee issues, and more importantly, how we can take a meaningful action to support those affected. Here at Plattwoods Church, our values include belonging, curiosity, and courage. So this is now the 6th courageous conversation that we have hosted. Previous conversations have been held on the important topics such as human sexuality, racism, gun violence, mental health, and more. Curiosity drives us to learn more about the world around us and the challenges faced by our siblings in Christ. Tonight, we will be discussing these complex issues with open minds and hearts, seeking to understand the experiences and struggles of immigrants, migrants, and refugees. Our panelists will be sharing stories and perspectives based on their personal experiences. Courage calls us to stand up and take action, even when the path is difficult. As we listen to our panelists, let's be inspired to find the bravery within ourselves to advocate for and support those in need, guided by our faith. Belonging reminds us that everyone deserves a place where they feel safe, loved, and valued. Our biblical foundations introduce us to a God who loves and cherishes every person God has made. And so our hearts long for every person to know that they belong. So tonight, as we engage in this conversation, we want to set the expectation that we will treat other stories with care and respect, and ask questions with the intent to learn and not to drive an agenda, and open our minds to what the Spirit of God might be telling us. Before we begin, please bow your heads and join me in a moment of prayer. Heavenly Father, tonight we come together with grateful hearts, thankful for this opportunity to gather and discuss how we can better understand, support, and welcome immigrants, refugees, and migrants in our midst. As we begin this important conversation, we seek your wisdom and guidance. In the Gospel of Matthew, we are reminded of Jesus' teachings. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. May these words inspire us to see you in all who are in search of refuge and belonging. The social principles of the United Methodist Church state that we recognize, embrace, and affirm all persons, regardless of country of origin, as members of the family of God. May these principles guide our actions and decisions. Bless our time together and guide our discussion tonight so it may lead to a deeper understanding and meaningful action. Open our hearts to new ideas and our hearts to the stories and experiences we will hear. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. At this time, I'm going to hand it over to Pastor Evie and our panel of speakers. Okay.
Thank you, Brandy. You've done a wonderful job setting this evening's table for us, so I'm grateful for all your work on that. I'll add my welcome to Brandy's this evening. My name is Evie Martin. I'm the lead pastor here at Plattwoods Church. My role this evening is pastor and then primarily facilitator for these fine folks to share their stories and their expertise and their witness to this topic at hand. As we go through the evening, we'll spend a little under an hour together talking about some of the issues before us with questions that we've prepared and dialogue that we've sort of walked through together. But at the end of that time, we'll leave space for questions and answers from you all. So as you came in, you might have received a piece of paper. You can write your questions on that at any time throughout our conversation. So if something comes to mind, feel free to jot that down. We also have a text line. Kirk, do we have that number that is going to go on the screen at some point?
Maybe.
Maybe. I can give it to you right now. if you will write it down and remember it. It is 816-33-999-44. 816-33-999-44. We'll see if we can get that up there. If not, you can also ask Candace, who's over here. Nancy, do you remember the number? Hey, it's there. So don't pay attention to the welcome. Just, you can text your question, the full question, to that phone number at any point throughout the evening. Thank you, Kirk. So those are the ways to get your questions in, and we will spend some time with that towards the end. I will stop talking now, and I would love to take a moment to introduce our panelists to you. I'll have them introduce themselves to you. We have quite the panel here for you this evening. So take a moment, just let us know who you are and maybe the specific role that you fill in your day job, but then also share just briefly a little bit about what inspired you to get involved in issues surrounding immigration, migration, refugees. Maybe you have your own personal story. Just share a little bit about what compelled you to get into this work. So I'll begin with you, Diana. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, my name is Diana Navarrete. I'm currently a practice manager at Samuel Rogers Health Center. If you are familiar with Samuel Rogers, we serve a lot of the refugee, migrant, immigrant community. I would say, depending on our location, over 50% of our patients, English is not their first language. Also, I had a pretty early start with serving, the immigrant, migrant community through my dad's church. Very early on, through soup kitchens and just volunteer work, serving the community. His congregation was primarily Spanish speaking. And just in general, my family came here from Mexico. I was 2 years old about when I arrived in the U.S. My parents obviously not speaking the language, cultural shock, all the things, but it's been it's a topic that's very near and dear to my heart because of all of these things. And serving at Samuel Rogers and serving this community has been a great experience to continue furthering kind of what my dad started through his church. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Suzanne.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. With these lights, you'd think you're in the early morning sun. I'm Suzanne Gladney. I'm an immigration lawyer, and I worked at Legal Aid of Western Missouri for 39 years. I set up inside of Legal Aid a nonprofit working with migrant workers. The organization is called Migrant Farm Workers. I now am just doing that, and we are serving migrant families and some migrants that come alone in Lafayette County. I think probably some of you know where Lafayette County is. It is the next county east of Jackson County. So it's about, from Independence, it's about 5 to 7 miles outside of Independence and goes all the way over almost to Marshall if you follow on Highway 24. The workers that and families that we're serving there are people who are picking peaches, not many peaches this year because of the freeze in April, but and apples. And so there are 3 orchards there in Lafayette County that have large numbers of workers, and those are the workers that we're serving.
Well, I'm Lucas Endicott, and I work for the Missouri Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. I'm the Associate Director of Mission Service and Justice, so it's a long title, but really it's how Methodists from across the state of Missouri connect in mission, whether that's down the street or across the globe. My own personal self coming to this conversation, I've been fortunate to live both on the U.S.-Canada border and the U.S.-Mexico border. When I was in my theological education in New Jersey, I worked for the General Board of Global Ministries, so I've been able to see how Methodists have responded to some of the things we'll speak about today, both in the U.S., in different parts of the U.S., as well as across the globe. And so I'm just excited to be a part of this important conversation and that you took time out on an evening like tonight to join us. So thanks for having us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Colstow. I'm the Refugee Services Director at Della Lamb Community Services. We are a local refugee resettlement agency in Kansas City, Missouri. We're one of 2 refugee resettlement agencies. So we receive funding from the federal government to resettle folks that have refugee status. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but have refugee status and are coming to make Kansas City their permanent home. So we have a great partnership with you all, so we're really thankful for the work that you all do with refugees as well, and I'm just excited to be here and to share more of our experience.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so even in these brief introductions, you all have used several different words. We've used the word immigrant or immigration. We've used the word migrant. We've used the word refugee. There's the word asylee, which we haven't used yet, but these are all words that we hear tossed around to varying degrees in different conversations at different levels. Can you speak, and I'll look to Sarah and Suzanne a little bit to speak to maybe the particularities of each of those words. What do they mean? And what, maybe legally, what does that mean for individuals who have those different status?
I would say that many of these words are used in different ways and often are saying about someone that word doesn't apply to them. So basically, immigrants are people who are not in the country where they were born. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're here. They may be in some other country, but they have immigrated, whether it was their choice or whether they had to. So that's an immigrant. A refugee is a word that the United States mainly uses, and refugees are at Della Lamb and at Jewish Vocational also and then there are some on the Kansas side, the Catholic Church on the Kansas side are having refugees coming in. Refugees typically are people who have left their home because of some government sort of issue that's going on that's caused their time to come. The other asylees are people who have applied for political asylum once they get here. You don't apply for it in your home country. You apply once you get here or once you get to the border to apply for political asylum. And that can be based on many different types of political issues that you might have had in your home country that makes you fearful to go home.
Yeah, and just to add a little more to the refugee status, refugee is a legal status, and people have to prove their status as a refugee. So they have to apply with the United Nations High Commission of Refugees to prove that they had to flee their home due to some type of persecution. So the fact of them having refugee status really shows that there is a lot of trauma involved in their displacement, a lot of trauma involved in their resettlement in general. We also work with kind of another classification, which is humanitarian parolees. Those are folks who have been evacuated in an emergency situation. So for instance, during the Afghan crisis several years ago, the evacuation of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Afghans, that they are considered humanitarian parolees. Basically, they could constitute a refugee as well. They just didn't have the time to go through the refugee process, so they came as humanitarian parolees. We're also seeing a lot of Cuban Haitians currently. I put those two together, but it's Cubans and Haitians that are coming with humanitarian parolee status as well that we are also serving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Suzanne, could you speak also to migrant? I know you represent a lot of migrant workers. If you could. The
migrant workers are people who migrate from one place to another for a specific reason, and usually it is for some sort of work. The workers that we are serving usually are migrating to 3 to 5 locations every year. For many of the workers that come to Lafayette County, they they are here for the longest time that they're anywhere else. We're expecting to have probably about 350 people that will arrive this week on Thursday and Friday. They will start picking apples the following week and then packing them. And they will leave probably at the end of October or first weeks of November. And then they will go to North Florida or South Texas for citrus. That's their next location. And so they usually have a way that they go every year. They go to these different locations to pick fruit. The ones that come here are tree fruit pickers. That's what they're doing up on ladders.
If I ask a follow-up to that, how do migrant workers come to be in the United States in any of these places that you've mentioned?
Some of them were born here. Some of them are people who were born in another country, were doing farm work in their home country. Most of them are from Mexico. We also have some from Guatemala and a few from El Salvador. They have done this type of work. Probably most of us haven't ever been up on ladders picking apples, but it's extremely heavy water. Peaches and apples have very high water content, so it's very, very heavy, up and down a ladder, up and down a ladder, up and down a ladder. And so that's how they get here. They have a crew leader that puts their crew together, puts them in a van or puts them in a bus and sends them. If they have families, then their families come with them. It's very, very rare that a woman is up on a ladder. Most of the women are working in packing sheds, which is essentially just like an apple factory where they're washing the apples and peaches and making determinations. Is this an apple that's going to be in a store? Is this an apple that is going to be applesauce, or is it going to be apple juice? Very, very fast decisions about the fruit. And that's mainly women or men that are no longer stable being up on ladders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a difficult work. Yeah,
I don't think I would want to do it. It is, they're very, very proud of what they do. This is what they do. This is their work. And this is what they do everywhere they go, is picking some sort of tree fruit.
Yeah. Thank you. So in your work with these different groups or classifications, statuses of people, what are some misconceptions that you encounter about, to say, immigrants as a large category? What are misconceptions that you encounter for those of, many of you?
I think a lot of the times, specifically at Sam Rogers, what I see is, for one, the misconception of everybody that we are seeing or that the health center sees, they don't have insurance because they are illegal, or they are here getting services at Samuel Rogers because they can't go anywhere else because they're illegal. And that's not the case at all. As we heard with the different terms, a lot of these people actually are here with a legal status. It might not be yet permanent, but nonetheless, they get services. A lot of people feel comfortable because, for one, the language barrier. We offer in-person interpreters, and a lot of people feel comfortable, obviously, being helped in their own language. A lot of them being in cultural shock, not understanding the system. At least having someone that understands the language or that speaks the language and maybe can relate a little bit makes them a lot more comfortable. But in general, those little things that I see when sometimes, for whatever reason, people come with insurance and their insurance sent them there, we've had different situations where they'll categorize all of our patients in, or put them in a certain category, and that's not the case.
It doesn't apply. Yeah.
Yeah, I think another thing to kind of go off that I've seen is folks kind of referring to everybody at the border as illegal, or they shouldn't be here because they're not following the right process. Well, that's actually not true. The process of seeking asylum for folks who want to cross the border is that they cross the border, they turn themselves over to U.S. Customs, and then there's the legal process to follow of setting a court date until they can get that hearing set. They're here technically legally, but they don't have a lot of recourse to provide for themselves. So the way the immigration system is currently set up, if you cross the border seeking asylum and you turn yourselves over to customs, you have to wait, I believe it's 150 days once your asylum claim is filed before you can get a work permit. So it's difficult for people to come here when they want to come to make a life here for themselves, and we tell them there's a way to do that, but then we say, but you have to wait, you can't work, you can't provide for your family. But to say that they're all illegal is just misinformation, basically, because they are following the right channels to be here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you have anything to add, Suzanne?
I would say that of the people we serve, probably 10 to 15% of the people are legally here, and we can help others because there are some that come on visas that they are allowed to be here. We probably are going to have about 100 of those this year that will be coming on buses straight from Mexico and will have to leave, I think, on October 14th to go back home. Many of them have come every year for the last 10 or 15 years. So there's lots of different categories of people and what kind of status they have.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you, because you were mentioning this earlier before we started the evening, about sort of the landscape of immigration over the time of your career. Have you seen a lot of change? Have you seen ebb and flow? What does that look like?
One of the things that I said when we were speaking before is that really the immigration laws have not changed very much in the last 20 or 25 years. And I think that is a difficult thing because there's been so many changes over the years that probably we need to have the government think about things a little bit more and figure out exactly who's going to be getting what. I know that Sarah was saying that someone finally got their hearing date letter, and the hearing was going to be in 2028. Mm-hmm. So at least they have a date, but...
And they were ecstatic about that date, by the way. The fact that they actually got a date, that they were ecstatic about it, even though it's 4 years down the road.
So I think just trying to figure out what is the best situation for folks so that they're not just waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting to get a work permit, waiting to get something. And they're usually not allowed to leave this area because everything is here right now, and they don't want them to move to somewhere else and have to transfer their whole case to another location where it might be even later than 2028.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd like to ask, so we're in our United States borders context right now, but to step outside of that, what is sort of, what's the bigger picture, and what are the challenges that these groups of people face that cause them to come here? Or what's the bigger challenges?
Maybe I'll speak a little bit from the Methodist side, since we may have some Methodists in the room. So some of these things that we're talking about, status is really important. And we took a group to the southern border a few years ago and talked with some border patrol people who were saying, the vast majority of people are trying to figure out legal statuses to do this sort of correctly. And so as Methodists, just to use the El Paso, Ciudad Juarez, which is the city in Mexico corridor area, there were a lot of services that actually had moved to Las Cruces, New Mexico, if you've ever been in that part of the U.S. So Methodists kind of invested heavy related to El Paso up to Las Cruces and had a lot of systems in place to support people who were trying to do things legally, who were seeking better lives for themselves and their families, etc. Methodists had come in, pulled out their checkbooks like we do, did covered dish dinners, and had a lot of systems in place. And then, of course, political policy changed to remain in Mexico. And so all the services that we had as Methodists to support a vulnerable population suddenly weren't needed, and they weren't needed in that spot. They were still needed, but now in a very different place. And so Methodists moved across the border into Ciudad Juarez to try to resource our Methodist communities there in Mexico in ways that they weren't, historically, they hadn't been doing for the last 20 or 30 years. And so as part of our Methodist understanding of this, and of course that's just the US-Mexico border, this is happening in Chile, this is happening in Turkey, this is happening as Methodists across the globe are trying to say, how do we respond to the movement of people who have been displaced by all sorts of things in search of a better life? And it's highly complex and always problematized by national borders. That's what we, people of faith, how we approach this.
Yeah. Other challenges, and Suzanne, or Diana, I'm sorry, you might speak to this as well, like the daily challenges that these groups of people encounter here as they are newcomers to our city. I mean, we're all working here in Kansas City specifically.
Yeah, so specifically at Samuel Rogers Health Care Center, we work with a lot of different agencies like Della Lamb, Jewish Vocational Services, trying to connect the refugees or specifically refugees, but really anybody that is needing healthcare services with all kinds of resources. Samuel Rogers has this way of trying to provide care in one place because they know how difficult it already is. So Samuel Rogers offers medical, dental, behavioral health, WIC services, trying to connect people with the marketplace. What we're trying to do is we see a lot of our patients that come in, or they're in cultural shock. They don't speak the language. They don't know how to navigate the system. For us in general, sometimes it's very difficult to navigate the insurance world, understanding what to get, what not to get, what is covered, what's not. And when you have things like you have to wait for a permit before you can even work, well, getting all of these resources takes time. And people coming from war-torn countries, being here, it's such a difficult transition to try and get into medical services that they desperately need but are very unfamiliar with, especially then let alone your dental or behavioral health services. We see, families that come with kids, very dire need of specifically my department, the dental department. Never seen a dentist before. But they're in these holding periods, of trying to do everything correctly and be connected to resources. But it's very difficult to navigate the system, especially when you have to leave your country very quickly or whatever it is. I even think back on my family growing up. My parents did not speak the language when we first arrived. For us kids, it was all great. It was fun and games. We didn't know any different. But I remember very early on having to interpret for my parents. All of these kids are put in situations where they have to act like an adult, if you will, because you're interpreting, you're trying to bridge these gaps in all these different situations. So it's very complex to deal with, yeah.
And Sarah, you probably see similar things in your work with.
Yeah, very similar. And just to emphasize the fact that preventative care is not not everybody has preventative care in their culture. So even to emphasize that with our clients sometimes can be really challenging. They don't see the need. Well, I'm not sick. Why should I go to the doctor? Well, my teeth feel fine. Why should I go to the dentist? So even those concepts that we really take for granted cannot be taken for granted with our clients. And then the language aspect too. Not only do we have folks who don't speak English, but they're pre-literate in their own language. So imagine dropping somebody like that into a culture that we're so dependent on language to navigate everything, to navigate transportation, to navigate all these appointments that we're setting them up with. And here you have somebody who they can't even read and write in their own language, let alone try to process what they're seeing in front of them and navigate this brand new culture. So I think that's such an important thing to consider. And then even things like, oh my goodness, we have people that have lived in refugee camps for decades. So imagine going from a literal camp, you're living in a tent for 20 years, and then we're going to put you in a brick and mortar house and expect that you know how to take care of that property. That's ridiculous. And we don't make those assumptions, but it can be really challenging to teach people how to take care of their property when they've never had to do it. So all the things that we take for granted are things that our clients absolutely do not.
Yeah. Can you speak just for a moment, what is a refugee camp? Where would a person come from and how would they get to a camp? Where might that be? That's the UNHCR process. What would that look like?
There's different ways that people get to camps. A lot of times they'll travel from their country of origin and they'll know that there's a camp that they can at least find some type of refuge at. But getting to the camp can be a really treacherous and difficult process. So a lot of the clients that we see that are coming from camps are originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and they'll end up in camps in Rwanda, Tanzania, different countries in Africa, and then they live there. So camps are varied in what they're able to provide for people. Some camps do have structures with schooling for children or, some type of infrastructure to support that. Others not at all, and they're very, very dangerous. A lot of them are very dangerous. So then they apply for refugee status. Once they get that status, their options are resettlement, which means they go to another country to build a life. Voluntary repatriation, they could potentially go back to their country of origin, although that doesn't happen very often, but if things calm down, they could go back. And then local integration. Some countries will allow refugees to integrate into their communities. So there are those are the three options that folks have.
Yeah. One of the challenges that I see, and I think we all probably can relate to, particularly in recent years, is sort of the rhetoric within the United States around newcomers of various statuses that we've assigned or given or confused, even just in a campaign season. I just jotted down some quotes from the last 6 days that I've gotten in my mailbox, that I've heard on the news. I'll just a sampling from a southern border state senator. Every day Americans are dying in crimes committed by migrants. From our Missouri state treasurer, secure the border, oppose benefits for illegals. From a Republican nominee for the President of the United States, a massive invasion at our southern border that has spread misery, crime, poverty, disease, and destruction to communities all across our land. How do we speak to that challenge? How do we respond to people, our neighbors, our family members, our community, maybe even our own sensibilities of attitudes toward newcomers? That people are taking resources from citizens, that people pose a threat to citizens. How do you respond to that in your own day-to-day conversations? No one wants to take that one.
I'll jump in.
Thank you, Lucas.
Because I think a faith element matters to this, that maybe we'll talk about more. There's one way, so there are different ways of understanding how humans relate to each other, right? And it seems to me that in so many cases that has been narrowly reduced to nation state political identification, and within our own nation state, then party or whatever, we just continue to divide and make smaller and compartmentalize. And of course, one of the great challenges of the Christian faith is to not compartmentalize. This is the message of Genesis 1 and 3. This is the hope that grounds Revelation 21. So it's that we're living in some sort of, that should create some sort of solidarity among God's creative, amazing life that puts us all in human community together. And some might hear that as a political statement, but it's actually a deeply theological statement. So I guess what I would say in reference, so my knee-jerk reaction to political reference is it dehumanizes. But then from my Christian perspective, it is then how must I understand relationship to other humans if I can somehow separate nation state, political identification, something else? Or is there something theologically under the hood that helps me create a different worldview to see things differently?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Their thoughts, yeah. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And what I was going to say is we've dehumanized people. We've turned them into numbers. We've turned them into a military attack on our country. We've made it about our own. We've made ourselves this little island, as if America is something that only we are entitled to. And that's not the way of Christ, first of all. And speaking to that, it's like, I always point people to who did Christ identify with? He identified with the people who were isolated. He identified with the strangers. He identified with the people who were ostracized and pushed down and the poverty-stricken. Those are the people he lived with and walked with and identified with. So I think that's our call. If you claim to be a follower of Christ, if you claim to be a Christian, that's our call, is who do we identify with? And I think about the powerful, and I think about the people who have resources. Those were the people who Christ condemned when they condemned these others. So just thinking about that as well, and calling, when you're speaking to people who claim that, I think that's such an easy thing to point to. But then, we have a responsibility to advocate for those who can't advocate for themselves. And I think this is a big part of what that's about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think too, just to kind of remember that generations back, my family came from somewhere else. Most of us have a long history of not having. I didn't know anybody in my family that wasn't here, but I know that they weren't born here initially. So I think just looking at the idea that no one should not help other people and help them get to be in a better spot themselves, their families.
Yeah, there's sort of this notion of a perceived threat, or again, diminishing of resources, or a surge at the southern border, or these different ideas. Is there a threat? We don't live in a border state with the southern border, northern border. We're right in the middle. And yet immigration is part of our community. There are people who have immigrated right here in this room and descendants thereof. But is that realistic? It's complicated. I understand that geopolitical issues and migration of people is complicated, but is there truth to those claims of there being a threat? How would you,
Well, again, I think the immigration system hasn't changed in a very long time. And now that there are many more people coming, I think to give someone a hearing that is, 5-7 years down the road and not give work permits within the first 60 days or 6 months, how are they supposed to survive without they want to work. Most of them really want to work. The migrants that we're working with are here to work. That is why they're here. And so we're not in that situation, but I know that in many places they want to work, but they don't have a work permit. If you don't get the work permit or some kind of ID from the United States, you can't get a driver's license. It's just, the whole thing is just a big circle that they need to get some kind of status. Even if it's temporary, they need to get something so that they can help themselves.
Yeah. So many people might find themselves in trouble legally because the system has not granted them the status that the system should have granted them already because of this backlog and problem.
The work permits are not permanent.
Right.
They usually are a year, sometimes it's 6 months. It's not like we're letting them stay here for the rest of their lives. They're going to have hearings and final decisions on that. I'm not sure how people are yes, food stamps are fine, but food stamps not everybody qualifies for food stamps unless you have some sort of status. So it's just difficult for them to even survive.
Suzanne, if one of the fruit farmers were on our panel today, what would they say about the migrant farm workers who are working? Would they say, oh yeah, I was going to hire that guy, but I hired that guy instead?
No, they would say, these workers are here and we need them. Other people don't want to do this kind of work. It is very, very difficult work. And Lafayette County is 99% farm work, soybeans, corn, fruit. That's what they do. And they need workers. They would hire a person who comes, but they don't want somebody up on a ladder who doesn't know what they're doing. They don't want to end up with workman's compensation, somebody falling off of a ladder and breaking their back or something.
Yeah. Did you want to add? Go ahead. Feel
Well,
free.
I was just going to say too, regarding like you talking about the threat of people coming, I think people will say a lot like, why would somebody come here if they know how difficult it's going to be? And I kind of switch that question and say, imagine how difficult their situation and their life must have been if they know how hard things are going to be in the U.S. and they decide, well, this is better than what I have now. Like, these are the stories we hear. These are the stories of people who are coming. It's that they are in a desperate situation, and coming here with all the struggles, the possibility of being homeless, not having food, not even getting food stamps, that looks way better to them than staying where they're at. So I think it goes back to that humanizing conversation and being able to empathize with another person's experience. If we have lived in relative comfort all of our lives, it's really easy for us to dismiss people who haven't had that experience. And so I think it's really important to not do that in order to see them as people. And then I do think, like we're talking about this, our immigration system and what we're seeing with the high numbers of people coming does point to how broken our system is. I mean, we've got cities like New York and Denver that are really overwhelmed with people seeking safety and asylum, and they don't know what to do with those numbers. So I think there is a call to the community. There is a call to people like churches and other community members to step in and help because we are seeing the broken system is really being revealed in the numbers that are coming.
Yeah, that kind of leads to my next question. Given the fact that we have a broken system, it's not a question of an open border or a closed border. That's a binary. The world doesn't exist in binary. There's something in between that we haven't figured out very well yet. We can't fix the political system today. In 20 to 30 years, it hasn't been able to be done. What can we as people of faith, where do we step into these places? And what's the call to us, first of all? What's our theological framework for this? We've hinted at it a little bit, but where can we step in, and what's our role with newcomers, with immigrants, with sojourners?
So you want me to talk faith stuff, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Jump into that. Big picture, and then we'll hone it in.
Sure. So I mentioned sort of the Christian understanding of these things needs to be somehow conditioned by this understanding of creation, moving to new creation with sin and redemption falling in between somewhere, right? There, you just got the whole Bible in 20 seconds. But this notion of the Imago Dei, the image of God that's understood in the early pages of Genesis, then sort of inform everything else. And so in the Old Testament, the Hebraic understanding of hospitality, of leaving of the edges of your field so that the migrant, the refugee, the foreigner in your midst can come and get what they need to eat, right? This was a Hebrew law code. In fact, many of the Hebrew law codes were oriented towards, remember, you yourself could be in this situation and have been and will be again, undoubtedly, because of the broken world in which we find ourselves. And really it's built off the theological notion too, that it's God alone. This is a gift, this life that we've got. It's God alone who we owe that to. And so let's not think too highly of ourselves. It should keep us humble and in solidarity with each other. And then of course, as we move to the pages of the New Testament, you see more in the pastoral epistles, etc. But maybe it's that Luke 10 parable of the Good Samaritan, which really gets at it. And, Jesus is being questioned and Jesus says, well, who do you think was the neighbor? And the response is, well, the one who did something about it, who crossed language, culture, the Samaritan, the one you didn't think was gonna do it, but the one who crossed all these different hidden and real borders and acted. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. So there's a lot in the biblical narrative in terms of the practical answer to your question. From the Methodist perspective, I'm assuming there are quite a few Methodists in the room. You may have heard of UMCOR, United Methodist Committee on Relief, and we think about it in tornadoes and hurricanes and earthquakes, right? But it started in 1940 as a response to people moving during World War II. It was to deal with refugee crisis created by war in a war that consumed Europe at that time in 1940. And so another thing to remember in this, so Christian Response has been on the cusp of, Della Lamb was an agency founded by Methodists who were saying, I think at the time it was Italian immigrants in that part of Kansas City, right? Saying we need to do something for this new group of people in our neighborhood. And you'll see, and many times it's the United Methodist Woman's name who's attached to these things, right? Because the women were on the forefront and still are. It's important to say, as the panel probably demonstrates, right?
If you want to get the job done right.
Hey.
Anyway.
Well, then fix it already. Wait and see. So there are these very practical responses, but it remains adaptive. I think the last thing I'd say, that as a person of faith coming to this, it's worth noting that historically a lot of this stuff is really recent. Like the language you started out with, if we would have said that 75 years ago in a Methodist church in Kansas City, they would have said, what?
What language?
The governmental asylum seekers, refugee, you immigrate? Right. I mean, not that those words didn't exist, but we've allowed legal constructs to override the way that we understand how we relate as humans. And so I think the Christian response is going to be, yeah, but what about the human? Like this solidarity created by the gift of life.
Well, if you look at the Old Testament, we have a handout for you later, but if you look at the places in the Bible where we're talking about foreigners, it's the word is translated often as foreigner, sometimes as sojourner, sometimes as stranger, depending on your translation, but the root Hebrew word is ger. So most often I would say it's stranger. But you think of a sojourner as a person moving, a person passing through. And also with it, Hebrew is such an amazing language. Within that is sort of an unspoken sense of guest. So the word itself implies guest. You look to the New Testament in the Greek and it's xenos. You think of xenophobia, it comes from that same root word. Same idea, it's a foreigner, it's a stranger, a person who didn't start out here but is here now, and also implicit in that word is this notion of guest. So in every scriptural reference of a person who didn't start out here but is here now and may leave soon or may stay, underlying both of those in Old Testament and New Testament is this notion of guest. And so I think if we took that and applied it to immigrant, refugee, migrant, all of the statuses, the words we've created, and understood them also as guest, I think that changes
come
how we
back at the
approach
preacher
that.
with something more too? Another theologian, right? There's also within the whole biblical narrative this notion that guest has a potential mystical quality, that guest is God. And in fact, it seems that's part of the Luke 10 analogy, that in so doing, you serve the God in neighbor. Mm-hmm. It's an amazing mystical, in fact, if you're interested in some really nerdy stuff, I can put you on a book later. There's a theologian, Sarah Coakley, who says that this is how we come to, again, find our Christic selves, that this is the way there's something about, another way to say it is, I can't truly be free unless all are free, and participating in freedom then brings my freedom.
My freedom, yeah.
Deeply mystical.
It is. It's spiritual.
Right.
It's part of our spiritual call. Do those of you, where do you all, and maybe you see this in some places more than others, where do you see people of faith or the church stepping into these spaces well? Where do you see the places where they're not? What's, like, you're on the ground with this sort of work. Just curious what you all see.
I would say that just pretty things that are fairly simple for people to do. Sarah's office will have some people who are legally here, are refugees, and they have the right to be here. They have paperwork. They're here, but they don't have a grocery store like we have. And so they have food stamps, but they don't know how to use that. They don't know, I know that sometimes we take people, if they have just arrived and they haven't been here before, we take them to the grocery store and they will look and they don't know what it is. They don't know what these cans are because in their home country, they don't have things in cans like that. Or they just don't know the simplest things. And so if you can just go with them and try to show them on the cup what it is, this is corn, this green color, and then the yellow color. Just simple things that you could help take someone to a grocery store, kind of show them how to check out. We have had other people getting food stamps too, and they get to the checkout and they have too much stuff. And so then the person at the cashier is very, very upset because they've gone through all of this and then they don't have enough food stamps to pay for it. So again, another person with them kind of keeping track of what the money's going to be will help them not be afraid to go back there again because this person at the cashier got mad. Mm-hmm. So just simple things. If you could go to Sarah's office or talk to her office and say, we'd be willing to take someone to the grocery store a few times and help them kind of figure out what to do there. Those simple kind of things.
I think for me, at Samuel Rogers specifically, and part of my job, I do or work with like the operations and customer service aspect of things. And there's always this in the back of my mind, ultimately comes down to like, what would Jesus do? Mm-hmm. So when I am training my front desk staff and the customer service, I always explain it to them as, if this is your grandma, if this is your mom, if this is somebody that you really, really love, how would you treat them? Would you be okay with the treatment that you are currently providing? Or how would it make you feel if they were treated poorly? A lot of the patients that we see being with the language barrier, with all of these life circumstances that they're currently in, sometimes they can't find their ID. And they're scrambling because their whole life is in this folder or in this manila folder. And it's very easy to become impatient and frustrated because you have other patients to check in. But ultimately, I feel in my line of work, regardless of what my staff believe, it's treating this person that is in front of you with that human decency, with that love that you would treat your grandma, your mom, whoever you love, because ultimately these people, all they want is to feel welcomed in a community. They're looking for that now since they've had to move from their homes. And so that's, I think, the biggest piece for me, these little things that add up to just treating people like humans. They're not just another number that I'm checking in. They're not just another customer. It's humans, especially that are coming with a lot more than just your average person. So.
Yeah, and I think I think it all starts first of all with education and understanding who's actually in your neighborhood. People don't. If maybe this is the first time you're hearing these terms, maybe you live someplace and you think, oh, these refugees, they're not around me. I can guarantee you that there might not be refugees around you, but you do have folks around you who are not wouldn't claim Kansas City as their place of birth, as their place of origin. So I think education is the first piece, is recognizing like we do have these new neighbors in our community. We do have folks that we have. I consider it actually a privilege to be on the welcoming end of receiving new people into Kansas City because of their stories. I think people coming here, so many of these stories feel miraculous to me, honestly. Just being chosen, your number being chosen as a refugee for resettlement is a very, very small percentage of people that will ever get that chance to resettle in another country. So the fact that they're coming here and that we have the opportunity to welcome them is a gift. So I think it all starts with education. And as far as involvement, oh my goodness. Suzanne mentioned ways, Diana mentioned ways. There's so many different ways to get involved, whether you become an advocate for people and you start sharing this within your networks. I think that's such a great way to start, is to spread what you've learned or what you know. You all, I mean, your church, Brandy, I work with Brandy quite a bit, and you all have done amazing work setting up homes for new families, doing it all, getting all the furniture together, buying the groceries, and just creating a really welcoming place for people to be. We have opportunities to partner with families, to walk with them, like Suzanne mentioned, and kind of show them the ropes. What does it mean to live in Kansas City? How do I navigate the doctor's office? How do I get to the grocery store? How do I ride the bus? So many different ways to get involved. That I'm happy to talk to you about later.
That's great. I remember with our group when we first started doing this work with Della, our folks had to learn how to ride the bus. They were like, how do we do this? It's really hard.
I call the bus the great equalizer because so many of us don't have to ever do that. And so we are as nervous as the refugees, but it's a great thing. It's like, that's putting you on the same level. You know, it's not like, oh my gosh, I'm up here, I have so much to teach you. No, it's like, I'm as scared as you are. Let's see if we can figure this out. So really, that's a great example. Yeah.
Step into our humanity together. So when we think, we'll move to questions here in just a moment. When we look at, I don't know the exact statistics, I've looked at a couple different things. I think it's over 100 million people around the globe live outside of their home country for a variety of reasons. But when we look at the future of our planet, of our human population, so many people move. The world has always been full of people who move. Our entire biblical story is based around a ragtag group of people that move, right? They don't have a home. They don't have a nation state. So much of our story is tied to the movement, the migration of people. The rest of human history is all written with the migration of people. What's the future of that, and how do you think that impacts us here in the United States? And how can we be prepared for that as if we ourselves are not migrating, if we're receiving people who are migrating here? It's a big question, but anyone want to take it? We've spoken to it in many ways, but.
Do you have an idea? You asked a question.
Well, no, I mean, do you, I guess for those of you working specifically, do you see a trend? Do you see, what is it going to look like in the future? Are we going to receive more people? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's a loaded question, but displacement's not going to end. I can guarantee you that. Yeah. So, I mean, statistics-wise, when I started at Della Lamb, it was only 3 years ago, they put the number of displaced peoples around 78 million. It's now over 110 million with displaced peoples. So you think about that much displacement in only 3 years, it's not going to end. And you referenced earlier climate change. That's another issue we're dealing with. That's forcing people from their place of origin. We have new categories that we don't even know where to put people anymore. Are those refugees? Are they something else? We haven't figured out a way to categorize them. So I think the trend of displacement isn't going to go anywhere. Wars are going to continue. There's going to be, ongoing things that are happening. I will say, I mentioned this earlier, there is kind of a lag with something will happen. We won't feel that initially, but then we'll start seeing folks come. We'll start seeing folks who are coming here to make a new life. So there is a lot unknown with kind of this next presidential race. We don't really know what's going to happen. And that's one of the things I believe with our immigration system that needs to change is consistent policy across the board, regardless of who's in office, because really the president does have a lot of control with how many people are actually going to be allowed into our country. that could change in the coming
And how
months and years.
resettlement agencies are funded.
Yeah, so
all of that
we
can
are
change.
funded by the federal government, and it's all dependent upon how many folks we're able to resettle, and that's dependent upon what the president says. So this presidential year, it's 125,000 refugees that we want to welcome, but that could change with the next president. Yep.
Yeah.
I think it's worthwhile to consider the way in which this conversation is conditioned by geopolitical realities. And so and because we've allowed this conversation about migration and refugee and all these sorts of things to be dominated by political structures, geopolitical places with little to no purchase in the larger global conversation have a very difficult time foreseeing a positive future. And so if we're here, I'm thinking of, for example, the nation state of Haiti, right? Who has a very similar Republican birth to our own countries, but because of relative wealth, geographic size, history, has little hope for a future because nobody wants to grant political status. And really, this comes down to the issue of status of humans that really is dominating the global story. And so, unfortunately, that's not a real optimistic conversation, but I think what we've seen, and the United Methodist Book of Resolution actually points this out, that this fixation on political or governmental or national status is really within the last 75 years. It's really post-World War II where this has come to dominate our understanding of how people move. And it's reflected probably in the room in talking about our ancestry, right? A lot of people were able to move with global flows without a change in status. And I think that's even been true, and then I'll be quiet, I promise, of longitudinal studies on our southern border. When our southern border was more porous, people were moving back and forth. But when we militarized and fortified, people weren't able to move back. And so we're sometimes, forcing to take a legal status when they just wanted a job for 6 months, right? Mm-hmm. And so I worry about it all being politicized. And people of faith have a very important role to play in this and say, it's not just politics or status from a passport.
Yeah, that's really good. Any other thoughts on that? Awesome. I'm grateful for all the parts of this conversation, and we could probably go on for quite some time, but I do want to create space for questions that might be coming in. If we've had text coming in, again, I'll remind you, maybe Kirk, we can pop that number up there again. If you want to send a question through text to the number, maybe, yeah. Oh, look at that. Thank you, Kirk. Mm-hmm. So just text your question to that number. If you've got paper, you can fill that out. Nancy over here and Sandy, if there's a couple people who will come, if you just wave that in the air, they'll come pick it up and bring it up here to Candace and Brandy. But we'll open it up to some questions for the group.
Okay, so the first question, this might be best for you, Diana, if you're able to speak to this at all, but it says, could anyone speak a little bit about DACA? Has the window closed for younger immigrants, and how fragile is this program? What can you share from your experience and what you know about it?
DACA?
Yes. Personally, from my personal experience, I think for me, I came to the United States when I was 2. I, didn't have a say in any of it. And when I was going to graduate high school and I went to look for colleges, I had the grades and I had some scholarship help. But to cover everything, it was still very expensive. And though the scholarships that I got, I guess didn't matter or didn't require a legal or a permanent status, there was a lot of scholarships that did, or they were placing me as an international student, which is very, very expensive, even more so than just regular tuition. So that was the first time that I really, for myself, understood the situation that I was put in, being that I've been here since I was 2. I spoke the language, didn't know anything about Mexico, their schooling. And though I speak Spanish, I wouldn't say I'm like the greatest grammatically or anything. And so I'm like, what am I going to do in Mexico? And I felt that I also didn't belong here. So it was the first time, very pinnacle time in my life where I didn't know what to do. And then President Obama put in place DACA. It's for kids or children that have come into the United States at a very young age without having a say in coming to the United States, have gone to school here, have a life here, and providing a legal status, even if it's not long-term, because it does need to be renewed every 2 years. It provided a way to now be able to work, to participate in other things with a legal status. I personally have my cousin who she got her doctorate, she's a doctor in physical therapy, and she's been renewing DACA every 2 years since it came out. But this is always a scary time when, new presidents, new people in office, because you always run the risk of it going away. And as of right now, at least from my understanding, there is no way to citizenship. It's just a legal status, but not a long-term permanent status or a way to citizenship. And it goes back to immigration hasn't really changed much, and it definitely needs a lot of improvement there.
And DACA is deferred action for children. Obviously, she's long past being a children, and you can't get new people can't apply now. They haven't been able to apply for the last 5 or 6 years now. So there are a lot of DACA people who are in their 30s now and have been here since they were little children. Several states and have said that they can get driver's licenses, others you can't. So it's been very, very politicized now, and it's possible that it will be canceled. That seems like that's probably coming down the road here.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, this question is for probably Sarah. So you mentioned earlier that in order to apply for asylum, people have to physically cross the border and apply once they arrive. Are there other ways that people are able to apply for asylum, such as, like at an embassy or something like that? Or do they, what does that look like? What does that process look like?
I'm going to turn that over to you.
Well, political asylum is there is a section of immigration that you file an application, and then it goes to that section. They will make a decision, not definitely, but whether it at least even looks like it might be, and at that point you will often get a work permit at that point. But then you will have a court hearing with an immigration judge, and again, that could be several years down the road. Kansas City has 2 immigration judges here, and they are busy every day, and the cases are probably 4 to 5 years now down the road.
Yeah, and my understanding is that asylum only happens when they cross the border.
Right.
If they want, the other option is refugee status, and that can take years. That I think that's why people do cross the border, is they're like, I need to get out of my situation, and to apply to be a refugee, to prove that. They have to tell their story over. I mean, it's the same with asylum cases. They have to retell their story over and over again. So I think it's just a time thing.
It's the most immediate step you can take in crisis.
To get out of your
To
situation.
get out of your
Yeah.
situation.
But I think that has changed in the past politically, right? In terms of at times there have been political forces trying to say you have to apply for asylum once you arrive at the first safe country. This has been conversation in the last decade, right? And I think what is sometimes missed is, well, what infrastructure is there for that, right? And so sometimes things are floated, whether or not they're trying to be enacted or not, that are just adding complications to a system that's already complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when we speak about asylees and immigrants specifically at our border, like immigrants who are waiting for work permits or asylees as they are waiting at the U.S. border, what are ways that we can help? What are things that we can do?
Well, certainly there are Methodist things that are going on both sides of. I mean, this is where the faith community is actually quite helpful because we transgress borders in that way. And so, if we're speaking specifically about the southern border, there are all sorts. There are border action networks, both of things that are happening on the state side and on the Mexico side. But for United Methodists as well, and other global denominations, there's work all over. So, like this last week, for example, I was on the phone with one of our migration people out of the General Board of Global Ministries. He's in Mexico City, and he was talking about different projects that they're doing on all the different respective borders along the way, right? So for example, there are a lot of Haitians that are moving to Chile right now. And so part of his suggestion, actually, as North Americans consider this conversation, is to engage in migration as a global concern. And so yes, focus some energies on the southern U.S.-Mexico border, but to get a more holistic understanding, we can participate in people who are pursuing better life all over the place. And in some ways, that helps us see our own in better relief when you see how different nation states are dealing with the movement of people. So that's just one.
And I think at the U.S.-Mexico border, there's been so many people trying to come across or getting across that I think a lot of the churches there have said, okay, you take the Venezuelans, you take the ones from Guatemala, you take the ones from Honduras, just so that they can kind of get a better idea of that group of people. I think because there have been so many people coming that a lot of the churches down there have made their fellowship halls, now cots. I know the Venezuelan one, I was down there a few weeks ago, and I mean, their whole fellowship room is just blankets. They're just taking in women with children. And so, I mean, I think that day they had almost 300 people there.
Mm-hmm. And I think, and Brandy will speak to this in a minute, there are ways that we can respond. We have a pilgrimage planned to the El Paso Ciudad Juarez border in October. We have an opportunity out where Suzanne works now I'm blanking on the name. Lexington, thank you. So ways that we can step into those places both to learn but also to serve. So those are coming your way, and we'll share a little bit more about that.
This question is for Suzanne. As you're working with migrant workers, are the migrant workers that you have in Lafayette County or that you work with looking for citizenship status or green card status? What, as an attorney, what kind of legal aid are you providing?
Yes, the migratory people often are either needing to get a work permit renewed or getting naturalization if they have a permanent resident card now. But those things also are very difficult for people that are migratory. For example, in order to apply for naturalization, if you're legally here as a resident with a green card right now, you have to be living in that state for 3 months before you can even apply for your naturalization. So people who are moving constantly it's really difficult for them to get those things in place. A lot of the workers that are not people that are going back to their home country, that are just here for 3 or 4 months and then going back to Mexico, the others, a lot of them use our post office box. because they don't have a permanent address anywhere. And if they did, they might not be there until 9 months. If their home spot is in Texas, they may get some mail there, but they're not going to be back in Texas for another 6 months or 9 months. And so we are doing a lot of applications just using our address, and then we can be in touch with them. They can get back up here to go for the interview or go to court for that, for the naturalization process. Those applications are extremely expensive. And so it's really important that they get here because they've paid, nearly $1,000 to apply to be a citizen. Mm-hmm. A lot of them are very interested in voting, but that's going to be really hard unless we can get them naturalized really fast.
How do we encourage curiosity during hard conversations with friends and family members who struggle to humanize immigrants, refugees, and migrant workers?
That is the question.
That's a very good.
I think for myself, I can get really defensive in these conversations, and that never goes very well. So I think being curious on both sides and being able to ask questions on both sides can be really helpful. Like, well, why do you think that? Or why do you think somebody would risk their life to come to this country? Just kind of turning it around and putting the guard down on both sides so that it doesn't have to be a defensive conversation. Because I feel like once somebody's defensive, it's pretty much over, and what's the point? So how can we engage more with curiosity on both sides? I think that's a really good way to at least start the conversation and hopefully have more of an honest dialogue versus the rhetoric. People are just spouting what they hear. They're not even spouting a lot of times what they really think because they haven't even taken the time to think about it. But if we ask questions and get them to think, I think that's one good way to step toward it.
Mm-hmm.
I have another approach, which I think that's great, to kind of get curiosity, and that's to move away from dialogue, actually, and move towards action. So just try to do something. Just pick something and be like, hey, would you go with me? Come up with whatever excuse you got. My car's busted. Will you drive me to this thing, to Suzanne's thing? And once it's sort of, that helps with the humanize. But it also, if we're taking seriously this mystic notion that we were sort of toying around with theologically, it really is, as we're engaging in this stuff. This is what Jesus says at the end of the Good Samaritan, right? Go and do it. Go and do likewise. So one way, which I think we don't often think about because we think discursively, what do I say in this situation? Pause the saying, get to doing, and see if that gets some conversation going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's just in ministry over 15 years, when people serve together, all those differences fade away. Like you get together a service project and you get the most random group of people in a room together and you're like, huh, and they love it. And now you've changed the conversation, you've changed the context. John Wesley, though we may not think alike, may we love alike, but those acts of service are what break down. I think Pope Francis says similar things. Like it's in service that we find our common ground. So finding those. Yeah, I like the tricky part, like trick them into going with you. It's a good strategy, because you kind of have to, probably, sometimes.
Well, we can find shallow ends of the pool, can't we?
Shallow ends of the pool.
Actually, we just we always want to jump in deep end, and it's like, let's just back up a little bit and be normal. We got a big grant from the Missouri Conference to do exactly this, to sort of ease congregations into action and see what comes out of it. And one, it's historic to who Methodists are, but I think it's just normative for humans, right? Let's try something together.
Yeah. Good luck. Others?
That's all I got. Do you have anything to add, or do you want me to close?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Thanks for your questions and your participation as well. So grateful for you. Anything left unsaid that needs to be uttered into the space before we sort of offer some next steps to folks gathered here? Anything we missed? Obviously it's a very big and complicated ball of yarn that we're untangling here, but.
I think a thank you from my perspective, just for coming out on a Sunday evening and talking about something that is touchy and difficult, but your presence here, I think, is a big deal.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. And my hope, of course, pastorally, is we create these spaces, A, to educate, B, for us to be curious and to learn to listen, and then C, to move us toward action. The first action for all of us is to, now that you know a little bit more, you can speak into some of those moments where inflammatory language is being used or incorrect information is being spouted out. You can say, actually, no, here's what I've learned, or here's a resource that's been really helpful for me. So really to equip you as advocates and curiosity seekers. So that's my hope for you all, and that if you have questions that didn't get asked or you think of them later, that you bring them forward. We can always reach out to Brandy. We know all these people now, and I'm really grateful for your time and you being willing to share pieces of your story and your work and your perspective. It's been a blessing for all of us here as well. There was one other thing I was supposed to say. Was there something else I was supposed to say? I didn't write it down, so now I don't remember. But I'll turn it back over to Brandy, who has some action steps for all of us. Oh, the handout. Were you going to talk about the big handouts? So you're going to talk about it?
Yeah.
I'm done. Thank you.
I'm not as good as like talking off the cuff as Evie, since she preaches so I have notes. But I just want to echo what she said. Thank you so much for being here on a Sunday evening and diving into this conversation with us. I think that these are very complex issues, and in an hour and a half, we can only scratch the surface. And so I hope that what we've learned inspires us to take action. Like Sarah mentioned, whether it's through being an advocate and continuing to learn about these issues, getting involved with volunteer work here at the church or just in the community in general, or by extending friendship and support to someone in need. Excuse me. Also, as Sarah mentioned, we are really proud of the work that we've already been doing in these areas and to work and address these issues. We've been involved with refugee resettlement work with Delalam for the last 3 years. Specifically mentioned was our House to Home team. We work to set up, we collect donations of furniture, we set up apartments, we buy groceries. I think we were once called like the Joanna Gaines of Delalam home setups, which was like a really good compliment for me because I'm an HGTV viewer. But anyway, there's lots of ways to get involved with that. We're also partnering with Lydia Patterson Institute in El Paso, Texas, as was mentioned. If you've not heard of that name before, Lydia Patterson Institute is a private faith-based school supported by the United Methodist Church. It provides an education to students at the El Paso Borderplex areas, to include Juarez and El Paso. So for over 100 years, Lydia Patterson has been dedicated to building bridges between 2 countries, 2 cities, and 2 cultures. And so we at Flatwoods are taking the opportunity to learn from them and other nonprofit organizations that work with immigrants and migrants along our southern border through a serve and learn trip. That's coming October 1st through the 4th. So if this conversation is something that you want to continue, going on that trip would be a great way to do that. We'll be talking with nonprofits and people who are working directly with people along the southern border. And last but not least, in September, there's an opportunity to join migrant farm workers in Lexington, Missouri, for their Monday night distribution of food, clothing, and other needed items to farm workers in the area. All of these opportunities are listed on a card with some more details and ways you can get more information, and our hospitality will pass those out as you guys are leaving. Or of course, you can always reach out to me. The other thing that I wanted to mention was if you did not register for tonight and you just came and want to receive some of this information, I'll be sending out a follow-up email. One of the questions that we received was, are there any books or recommendations of things that we can read and learn about to know more about this topic? I do have a book list that will be included in the email. So if you want that information and did not register with us, you can, it's not up there anymore. You can text that number. Just text your email address and we'll add you to our distribution list so you can have all of the information on next steps along with information on the books that we have and recommend for you.
Did you share this? Were you gonna?
Oh, yes.
This is amazing.
Yeah.
They need this.
So I also printed out some cards that came from the United Methodist Church and Society. They are faith and facts cards, so they have information on both sides. And one is about farm worker justice, and the other one is about immigration in the United States. These are really great because they have information on them about what specifically does the Bible say about these topics. What does the United Methodist Church say? So it has some information about social principles, book of resolutions, all that fun stuff. And then it also has just some next steps. What are the facts? And so it's just a great card with some general information that you can have. I can also link those in the email too. So if you don't want to take one with you, I can put it in the email. I think that's it. I just want to say thank you again to our panelists for sharing all of your expertise and experience with us. I'm just really grateful that you guys said yes to this invitation to come and talk about this, and also for the work that you're doing and continue to do. It's been such a joy to partner with you and to learn from you and all of those great things. So thank you so much. Yes. Oh, yes. Thank you, Sam. So we're recording this evening, so I'll try to link it also in the email. How about that? And then if you want, and we'll probably share it on our Facebook page as well, but if you want to share that with friends, family members, you'll be able to do that too.
It should go on our YouTube by the time once we get it recorded and condensed, it'll go on our YouTube channel.
It'll be on our YouTube channel. Okay. Before we conclude tonight, please join me in a prayer. Loving God, we come before you tonight with hearts full of gratitude for the meaningful discussion we've shared. We thank you for the wisdom and insights of our panelists and for the compassion and commitment of all who have gathered here. As we reflect on the stories and challenges of immigrants, migrants, and refugees, we ask for your guidance and strength. Help us to embody the values of curiosity, courage, and belonging in our daily lives. May our curiosity lead us to a deeper understanding and empathy for those who are displaced. Grant us the courage to stand up for justice, to speak out for the voiceless, and to take action that makes a difference. And let our commitment to help to belonging inspire us to create a community where everyone feels welcome, safe, and loved. We pray tonight for those who are on the move, seeking refuge and a better life. Protect them on their journeys, comfort them in their struggles, and bless them with hope and resilience. Guide us as your church to be a beacon of light and a source of support for all who are in need. As we leave here tonight, may we carry with us the lessons we've learned and the inspiration we've gained. Help us to continue this important work with faith, compassion, and dedication. In your name we pray. Amen.